A car with gas in the tank, keys in reach, engine that starts on the first try, a cabin stocked with enough food to keep 5 men alive for a year, heat ready to flow with a single turn of a valve, matches sitting in plain sight on the counter, 5 grown men, and they all died anyway. Not because the car broke down, not because the cabin burned, not because the food ran out or the gas line froze or the matches were wet. Everything worked. Everything was right there. And those 5 men, in full possession of their legs, their hands, their ability to open a can, to turn a valve, to simply stay inside a warm car, chose to walk 19 miles into a 0-degree blizzard in sneakers and light jackets. They walked past the cabin once, maybe twice, in the dark. They eventually found it. They went inside. And then they sat down in the pitch black, surrounded by food on every shelf and heat waiting to be switched on, and they slowly, agonizingly starved and froze to death over the course of several weeks. One of them may have watched it happen, and then walked back out into the snow and vanished without a trace. His body has never been found. This is not a thought experiment about the limits of human will. This is not a parable. This is a documented, investigated, still officially unsolved true crime case from the winter of 1978 in Northern California. And it is, without question, one of the most psychologically shattering mysteries in the history of American cold cases. The Yuba County 5, sometimes called the American Dyatlov Pass. And once you go deep enough into the evidence, you begin to understand why that comparison doesn't even capture the full extent of how wrong this all went. Tonight, we are driving up into the Plumas National Forest. We are following the route that nobody has been able to fully explain in nearly 50 years. We are going through every letter of every police report, every witness statement, every forensic anomaly, and every theory. From the psychological to the conspiratorial, until we hit the wall that every investigator before us has hit. The wall that says, we still don't know. Turn off the overhead light. Watch the road. And if you're driving somewhere remote tonight, maybe don't take any unmarked turns. You're listening to Midnight Whispers. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit subscribe and turn on all notifications, because every week we go exactly this deep into exactly this kind of dark. Now let's go back to February of 1978. Let's start where everything still made sense. The story of the Yuba County 5 doesn't begin in the mountains. It begins in the clean, electric warmth of a college basketball arena under bright overhead lights, surrounded by the noise of a crowd that had no idea what was about to happen in the parking lot. February 23rd, 1978. Chico, California. The UC Davis Aggies were playing a home game, and somewhere in the bleachers, 5 young men from Yuba County were cheering like they didn't have a care in the world. Their names, Gary Mathias, Ted Wire, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, and Jack Hewitt. They ranged in age from 24 to 32. They had grown up in the same community. They played basketball together. They bowled together. They traveled to games together in Madruga's beloved turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego, a car he maintained with almost obsessive pride, the kind of pride that working-class men pour into the things they own because ownership means something when everything else feels uncertain. Each of these men lived with some form of intellectual disability or psychiatric condition. This is important to understand not as a diminishment of who they were, but as essential context for everything that follows. They were part of a supported living community. They had caregivers, family members, rigid daily routines. Some were more independent than others. Jack Madruga was perhaps the most capable of the group. An Army veteran, a licensed driver, a man with previous work history who had learned to navigate the world on his own terms. He was meticulous. He did not like the outdoors. He had no interest in hiking, camping, or any activity that put him in contact with wilderness. He would not have driven up a mountain road voluntarily. That detail will matter enormously later. Ted Wire was also high-functioning. Stocky, good-natured, the kind of man who showed up early and stayed late. 200 pounds of quiet, steady reliability. Bill Sterling and Jack Hewitt were gentler, more dependent. Men who found safety and comfort in the familiarity of home, family, and routine. Sterling in particular was deeply attached to his parents. He had never spent a night away from home without telling someone where he was going. And then there was Gary Mathias. Gary was the outlier in the group, and not in a small way. He was sharper than the others, more charismatic, more street-aware. He had served in the U.S. Army in Germany, an experience that ended with a diagnosis of severe paranoid schizophrenia and an early discharge. His history included violent psychotic episodes. In the years before 1978, there had been incidents, hospitalizations, frightening breaks from reality that had terrified people around him. But by February of 1978, Gary was a success story. 2 full years of stability, regular psychiatric appointments, daily medication, a job working at his stepfather's business. His family was cautiously, gratefully optimistic. He had come a long way. The basketball game went perfectly. The Aggies won, which put everyone in high spirits. Around 10 o'clock that night, the 5 men filed out of the arena, drove to Bears Market in downtown Chico, and bought snacks for the ride home. Twinkies, sodas, cartons of milk. The clerk behind the counter would later tell investigators that they were laughing, relaxed, completely unremarkable. Just 5 friends stocking up before a drive. They had every reason to be in a good mood. The next morning, February 24th, they were scheduled to play in their own local Special Olympics basketball tournament, a tournament they had been preparing for all week. They were going home to sleep and waking up to something they loved. They climbed back into the Mercury Montego, Jack Madruga behind the wheel, the way he always was. And they drove out of the Bears Market parking lot into the Chico night. The route home was not complicated. South on Highway 99, 50 minutes of well-lit valley road, a drive they had made before. They were never seen alive again. By 2 in the morning, the families were awake and waiting. By sunrise, someone had called the police. And by the end of that day, 5 young men and 1 turquoise Mercury Montego had simply ceased to exist in any location that anyone could find. 5 days of nothing. 5 days of spreading search grids across the valley, checking roadsides for skid marks, interviewing gas station attendants, calling hospitals. 5 days of families sitting by phones that didn't ring. Then, on February 28th, a lone Forest Service ranger named Gary Mathias, no relation, was running a routine patrol through the snow-locked upper reaches of the Plumas National Forest. And he saw something that made him stop his vehicle and step out into the cold. Parked at the end of a narrow, unmarked logging trail, at the absolute edge of the snall line where the road had been effectively consumed by winter, was a turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montego. Let me be precise about where this car was, because the geography matters enormously. The logging road where Madruga's car was found is in the Plumas National Forest, roughly 70 miles northeast of Chico, in the exact opposite direction from Yuba County. The elevation sits several thousand feet above the valley floor. To get there, whoever was driving had to leave Highway 99, navigate through smaller connecting roads, and eventually turn onto an unpaved, unmarked logging spur that is not on any standard road map and is not lit at night. The road is rocky, riddled with ruts, studded with sharp stones that would destroy the undercarriage of a low-riding sedan. Investigators arrived at the scene and began documenting everything. The car was locked. No, wait. The car was unlocked. Every door. The keys were gone, removed by whoever got out last. The interior was scattered with the remnants of the Bears Market stop, crumpled Twinkie wrappers, empty soda cans, a milk carton. The seats were undamaged. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no indication that anything violent had occurred inside the vehicle. Then a mechanic crawled underneath. The oil pan, clean, not a scratch. The exhaust system, intact. Every component that would have been scraped and gouged by the rocks on that logging trail was completely unharmed. The car had been driven up that road, the wrong road, in the wrong direction, at night, in winter, without a single mechanical consequence. This struck investigators as nearly impossible for a low-clearance 1969 sedan. Either the road had been more passable that night than it appeared in late February, or the car had been driven with a slow, deliberate, almost supernatural caution that preserved it perfectly. A mechanic hot-wired the ignition. The engine started immediately. The fuel gauge showed a quarter tank remaining. The car wasn't stuck. It wasn't disabled. It wasn't in any condition that would have prevented 5 men from simply staying inside it, running the heater and waiting for morning and daylight and the return of common sense. Instead, they had gotten out. Voluntarily. In the dark. In a blizzard. Wearing spring jackets and sneakers. And they had walked into the forest. The question that every investigator, every criminologist, every armchair detective who has ever picked up this case immediately asks is the same. Why did they stop here? Not just why did they leave the car? Why did they come here in the first place? Who knew this road? Who directed them? How does a man like Jack Madruga, who hated the outdoors, who had never been to the Plumas National Forest, who took obsessive pride in his pristine vehicle, how does a man like that end up at the end of an unmarked logging trail 70 miles from where he was supposed to be going, at some point after 10 o'clock at night, in a storm? The answer, if there is one, was never found in the car. But a witness came forward with something that shifted the entire case. His name was Joseph Shones, and his story deserves to be taken more seriously than investigators initially gave it credit for. On the night of February 23rd, the same night the 5 men disappeared, Shones had driven his own vehicle up that same mountain road to assess the snowpack for an upcoming ski trip. His car became genuinely stuck in the snow. While trying to free it, Shones suffered a massive heart attack. He collapsed back into the driver's seat, barely conscious, and lay there in the dark at high altitude in a winter storm. At some point during the night, through the frost-glazed glass of his windshield, he saw headlights. Another vehicle had pulled up behind him. He heard car doors open. He heard voices. He called out for help. The headlights went off. The voices stopped. Later, he wasn't sure how much time had passed. The pain was making everything blurry. Shones looked out again and saw flashlight beams moving through the trees. Flickering. Multiple beams, suggesting multiple people. And he swore, through the blur of pain and cold, that he could hear a woman's voice among them. And that one of the shapes he could make out appeared to be holding something. Something small, bundled close to the body. A baby, he thought. He called out again. The lights went immediately dark. By morning, Shones had used the last of his fuel trying to stay warm. He managed to start the hike down the mountain on foot. On his way down, he passed the Mercury Montego sitting abandoned at the edge of the snow line. Police initially filed his account in the category of hallucination. A man with a heart attack in the dark at altitude sees things. That's the reasonable explanation, and it's not wrong on its face. But here's what makes dismissing Shones much harder than it sounds. He described the vehicle parked behind him in accurate detail. Color, approximate size, body style. It matched Madruga's car. And his account of the flashlights in the trees is consistent with what we later know. That the 5 men were, in fact, on foot in those woods that night, moving through the dark. So who was the woman? Who was carrying a baby on a mountain trail at night in a blizzard? Was there a second car that drove the 5 men up there and then left? Was there a second party, threatening, coercive, unknown, that Shones was close enough to hear but not close enough to identify? Or had Shones simply witnessed the group from the Mercury Montego moving through the trees and misidentified one of the 5 men's shapes in the dark as female? We do not know. We have never known. What we know is that the 5 men walked away from that car, 19 miles through snow and 0-degree temperatures, and that not all of them made it to the one place that could have saved their lives. Spring came late to the Plumas National Forest in 1978. The snow that had swallowed the mountains in February held on stubbornly through March and April, sealing whatever secrets lay beneath it under a white silence that nobody could penetrate. On June 4th, 103 days after the Mercury Montego was found, A group of hikers approached a remote backcountry trailer maintained by the Forest Service as a seasonal wilderness shelter. It was located 19 miles from the abandoned car. 19 miles that, in February, in sneakers and spring jackets, through blizzard conditions at altitude, would have been a death march in the most literal possible sense. They smelled it before they reached it. One of the windows had been broken out from the outside. They looked in. On a bunk bed in the back room of the trailer, wrapped in 8 layers of heavy canvas blankets, was the body of Ted Wire. The medical examiner's report was one of the most haunting documents to come out of this case. Wire had been a robust 200-pound man. The body weighed approximately 80 pounds. His beard had grown more than 2 inches, consistent with survival of 8 to 13 weeks after disappearing. His feet were black, both of them, consumed entirely by gangrene from advanced frostbite. His body had essentially consumed itself. He had starved to death. Now here is the part that breaks something in your brain if you let it. Investigators opened the storage lockers in the adjoining room. Inside, a full Forestry Service emergency cache. Military-grade sea rations, canned meats, canned fruit, dehydrated stews, chocolate. Enough caloric content to sustain multiple men for the better part of a year. The cache required only a standard P-38 military can opener to access, the kind that attaches to a keychain. A child could operate it. Exactly 9 cans had been opened over the entire span of Ted Wire's 13 weeks in that cabin. 9 cans. For 3 months. For a man whose body was eating his own muscle tissue to survive. Feet away. Literally feet. The food was feet away from where he lay dying. And then the heating system. Directly outside the rear wall of the trailer sat a large commercial butane tank, fully hooked up to the cabin's interior heating unit. The connection was intact. The tank was full. Turning on the heat required locating a single valve on the exterior of the tank and rotating it counterclockwise. Inside the cabin, on a small counter near the kitchen area, sat a box of matches and a printed instruction card for lighting the pilot. The valve was never touched. The matches were never used. The instruction card sat exactly where it had been left by the last forestry worker to pass through. Ted Wire froze to death in a cabin with a full heating system and a year's worth of food. There are 2 possible explanations for this, and neither of them is comfortable. The first. Ted Wire, by the time he reached the cabin, was so mentally and physically destroyed by exposure, by weeks of walking through a winter wilderness, by frostbite that had taken his hands and feet long before he reached the shelter, that he was simply incapable of the motor function required to open a can or turn a valve. His brain was shutting down. He had nothing left. The second, someone wouldn't let him, because Ted Wire did not wrap himself in those 8 canvas blankets. The medical examiner noted explicitly that the blankets were tucked under his body with a precision that would have been physically impossible for a man without functional hands. Someone else was in that cabin. Someone cared enough about Ted Wire to tuck him in, and someone, perhaps the same someone, perhaps not, refused to let him eat, refused to let him turn on the heat, and eventually left him there alone. There was one more item on the nightstand. Sitting next to Ted Wire's leather wallet was a gold wristwatch. Expensive, well-made. It did not belong to Ted Wire. It did not belong to any of the other 4 men. Its owner has never been identified. Someone brought that watch into the cabin. Someone left it there when they left. Search teams went into the surrounding forest in the weeks after the cabin was found. A mile from the trailer, searchers recovered the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling. Both had died of hypothermia, most likely within the first week after leaving the car, before ever reaching the cabin. The forest and the wildlife had scattered what was left of them. They had walked 19 miles in the wrong clothes through a blizzard, and they had not made it. That, as awful as it is, makes a certain brutal sense. Several weeks later, northwest of the cabin, in dense underbrush, searchers recovered a skull, a spinal column, and a recognizable leather jacket. Jack Huette's father, who had joined the search teams out of desperation, identified his son's jacket himself. Jack had also died in the wilderness before reaching shelter. That left one man, Gary Mathias. Inside the forestry trailer, sitting on the floor near the bunk where Ted Wire died, were Gary Mathias's tennis shoes. He had been in the cabin. He had made it. One of only 2 of the 5 men to survive the 19-mile walk. And at some point, he had put on Ted Wire's heavy leather boots and walked back out into the forest. His body has never been found. Not a bone, not a piece of clothing, not a single trace. Gary Mathias's antipsychotic medication, the drug that had kept him stable, functional, and non-violent for the previous 2 years, was recovered from the glove compartment of the Mercury Montego. He had left it in the car. He had been without it from the moment they stepped out onto that logging road in February, and by the time he was inside that cabin watching Ted Wire die, he had been without it for weeks. Without his medication, the psychiatric profile is unambiguous. Gary Mathias would have descended into active paranoid schizophrenia. The timeline of decompensation without antipsychotics in a patient with his history would place him in full psychosis within days to weeks of discontinuation. Add to that the extreme physical stress, the cold, the disorientation, the isolation, and you have conditions that would accelerate a psychiatric breakdown past anything his treatment team had seen in years. What does severe paranoid psychosis look like in those circumstances? The food that should have been eaten becomes contaminated, poisoned, maybe by whoever left it there, by enemies, by the government, by forces only Gary can perceive. The butane tank outside isn't a heating system. It's something else. It hisses. It ticks. It could explode. Every label on every can is a threat in a language only he can read. Every shadow that moves across the window is confirmation of what the voices have been telling him. That they are not alone up here. That something is out there. That to turn on the heat or eat the food or make any noise whatsoever will bring them closer. Did Gary Mathias, in the grip of a full psychotic break, keep Ted Wire from eating? Did he hold dominion over that cabin through the sheer force of terror? Not malicious in his own mind, but absolutely convinced that he was protecting them both? Did Ted Wire, already broken by weeks of exposure, defer to Gary because Gary was the one who had always been the most alert, the most aware, the one who knew things? And when Ted finally stopped moving, when the body wrapped in 8 canvas blankets went completely still, did Gary Mathias place that unknown gold watch on the nightstand, lace up the dead man's boots, and walk back out into the forest to face whatever his shattered mind told him was waiting? Or is there something else entirely at work here? Because there is a second theory that refuses to be fully dismissed, no matter how uncomfortable it makes the investigators who are supposed to prefer clean, provable answers. The 5 men had no maps of the Plumas National Forest. None of them had any known connection to that area. No family trips, no camping history, no reason to know that road existed. Madruga was obsessive about his car and hated the outdoors. Sterling had never spent a night away from home without calling. To navigate that unmarked logging road in the dark, in winter, going precisely to the place where Joseph Shones was stranded. That requires knowledge that none of the 5 men appear to have possessed, which means someone else may have known it. Someone who guided the Mercury Montego up that mountain, either from a lead vehicle or from the passenger seat, and knew exactly where they were going. Someone who left a gold watch that has never been identified and has never been claimed. Someone who Shones heard in the dark with a voice that didn't belong to any of the 5 men we know about. Someone who is not in any file. The Yuba County 5 case officially remains open. No one has been charged with anything. There was no determination of foul play, but there was no clean, natural explanation either. The case exists in a legal and investigative limbo that has not moved in nearly half a century. Gary Mathias was declared legally dead in 1992, 14 years after he walked out of the forestry trailer in Ted Wire's boots. His case remains technically active as a missing persons investigation. Somewhere in the Plumas National Forest, or somewhere beyond it, there may be bones that have never been found, covered now by decades of seasons, moss, and time. The gold watch has never been identified. The woman Joseph Shones heard in the dark has never been found. The question of how and why the Mercury Montego ended up on that logging road has never been answered with anything stronger than a theory, and the image that stays with you. The one that investigators who work this case still describe as the thing that keeps them up at night is the cabin. The specific, suffocating paradox of the cabin. A man starving for 13 weeks, surrounded by food. A man freezing to death, with heat ready to flow at the turn of a valve. A man so mentally or physically destroyed, or so controlled by someone else, that the gap between survival and death was a distance of approximately 8 feet, and he never crossed it. There are cases that test your belief in human rationality, and then there are cases that shatter it completely and don't apologize for the wreckage. The Yuba County 5 is the second kind. Somewhere in Northern California tonight, the Plumas National Forest is dark and cold, and exactly as silent as it has always been. The forestry trailer has been removed. The logging road has been reclaimed by decades of growth. If you drove up there now with a good map and a headlamp, you might find the place where the Mercury Montego sat at the edge of the snowline, and you might stand there and try to understand what it felt like to be one of 5 men getting out of a working car in the middle of a winter night and choosing to walk into that. You won't be able to understand it. Nobody has. That's the thing about this case that genuine investigators will tell you quietly, away from the official reports and the careful language of forensic documentation. It resists understanding not just because the evidence is incomplete, but because the behavior itself, the walking away, the not eating, the not turning on the heat, violates something foundational about what we believe human beings do when they are afraid and cold and in danger. We survive. We reach for the food. We turn on the heat. We stay in the car. Unless something, or someone, makes that impossible. As you head into your night, wherever you're going, whatever road you're on, stay on the highway. Don't take the unmarked turns. And if someone in the passenger seat starts giving you directions to a place you've never heard of, toward a road that isn't on any map, maybe ask a few questions first. Now, drop your theory in the comments. Who guided that car up the mountain? What was Gary Mathias protecting Ted Wire from? Whose watch was on the nightstand? I read every single comment, and the best theories get their own episode. Thank you for riding with Midnight Whispers tonight. Stay warm out there, and keep your eyes on the tree line.